Imagine you are standing in the center of the world's busiest intersection, surrounded by a sea of faces, illuminated by the neon glow of 1,000 screens, yet you feel an ache in your chest that suggests you are the only soul left on Earth. We live in the most connected era in human history, with the ability to reach across oceans in a millisecond, yet the modern heart has never been more isolated. We have traded the warmth of presence for the cold flicker of a blue light, and we wonder why our spirits are shivering. You scroll through endless lists of contacts, you see the digital echoes of people you once called friends, and you feel the crushing weight of their absence or, perhaps worse, the hollowness of their presence. You ask yourself why they left. You ask why the person you trusted most suddenly became a stranger. You feel abandoned, discarded by the world, left behind by those you thought were your anchors. But what if I told you that this emptiness is not a mistake? What if this sudden silence in your life is not a tragedy, but a profound, surgical intervention? The truth is that for over 14 centuries, a secret has been hidden in plain sight, waiting for the moment your heart was broken enough to finally hear it. The modern human crisis is not one of scarcity, but of noise. We are burnout. We are exhausted from the constant performance of being okay. You wake up with a knot in your stomach, a lingering anxiety that whispers you aren't doing enough, being enough, or belonging enough. You look at your life and see a collection of broken connections. Maybe it was a childhood friend who stopped calling. Maybe it was a partner who walked away when things got difficult. Maybe it was a professional circle that excluded you just when you needed them most. You feel the sting of rejection like a physical wound. It keeps you up at night, replaying conversations, wondering what you did wrong. You feel the meaninglessness of the hustle when there is no one to share the victory with. This loneliness feels like a prison, a dark room where the walls are closing in. But the Quran quietly reveals a different perspective, a divine lens that transforms this prison into a sanctuary. It tells us that what we perceive as loss is often a shield. There is a verse that breathes life into the deadest of hearts. In Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 216, it is written, "But perhaps you hate a thing and it is good for you, and perhaps you love a thing and it is bad for you. And Allah knows while you know not." Read those words again, not with your eyes, but with your soul. Perhaps you hate this loneliness. Perhaps you hate the way your social circle has shrunk until it is just you and the Creator. But the verse suggests that this very isolation is the good that you cannot yet see. The Prophet once taught us that when Allah loves a servant, He tests them. Sometimes that test is the removal of every crutch you leaned on. Every person you put your trust in, every friend you prioritized over your own spirit, every voice that drowned out the divine whisper, they were removed not to hurt you, but to save you. Consider the story of Adam. Not the first man, but a man of our time. Adam was a man who defined himself by his network. He was the life of every gathering, the successful businessman who thought his worth was reflected in the number of people who sought his favor. He loved the noise. He loved the validation. Then, a series of betrayals and a sudden downturn in his health cleared the room. The phone stopped ringing. The invitations dried up. He sat in his quiet apartment, facing a silence he had avoided for 40 years. At first, the silence was terrifying. He felt like a ghost. But in that silence, he began to hear the rustle of the wind. He began to notice the rhythm of his own breath. He started to pray, not as a ritual, but as a conversation. He realized that the people he loved were actually distractions from the one relationship that truly mattered. His loneliness was actually a divine invitation to a higher company. He wasn't being punished. He was being decluttered. He learned that some people are like shadows. They only follow you while you are in the sun, but the moment you enter the shade of a trial, they disappear. God removed them so Adam could finally see the light that casts no shadow. Then there is Sarah, who spent years trying to fit into a social circle that required her to shrink her values. She feared being alone more than she feared losing herself. She stayed in toxic friendships because the alternative felt like a death sentence. When those friends eventually turned on her and pushed her out, she felt destroyed. She felt the hate mentioned in the verse. She mourned the loss of people who never truly cared for her. Yet, months later, she found a clarity she had never known. Her anxiety dissipated. Her heart felt lighter. She realized that God had physically moved those people out of her path because they were blocking the sunlight of her own growth. The removal was an act of mercy. It was the divine hand clearing the weeds so the flowers could finally bloom. She learned that intimacy without alignment is just a slow form of spiritual suffocation. And look at Elias. Elias lost his career and his social standing in a single month. He felt the world had turned its back on him. He felt the coldness of being a nobody. But in that period of forced isolation, he discovered a strength he didn't know he possessed. He stopped looking outward for permission to exist and started looking inward for the purpose of his existence. He realized that the crowd had been a cage. Their expectations were the bars. Their judgment was the lock. When the crowd left, the cage vanished. He was finally free to be the version of himself that God intended, not the version the world demanded. Modern science is only now discovering what the Quran has always hinted at. Modern neuroscience tells us that our brains are incredibly plastic, but they are also highly susceptible to the social contagion of our environment. When we are surrounded by people who are out of alignment with our true nature, our nervous systems stay in a state of low-level fight or flight. This chronic stress inhibits the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for deep reflection, creativity, and long-term decision-making. When God removes these people from your life, your biology actually begins to heal. Your cortisol levels drop. Your brain begins to rewire itself for Fitra, the natural, primordial state of human goodness. Loneliness, in a psychological sense, is often the brain's way of forcing a system reboot. It is the biological necessity of silence. Psychology calls it individuation, the process of becoming a whole person, independent of the collective. But the Quran called it Khalwa, the sacred seclusion where the soul meets its maker without intermediaries. This is the integrated divine system. Your biology, your psychology, and your spirituality are not separate compartments. They are one beautifully aligned architecture. The Quran is the blueprint for this architecture. When the blueprint says a certain connection is bad for you, it isn't a moral judgment alone, it is a structural reality. To thrive, a building needs the right environment. To thrive, your soul needs the right company, or sometimes, the profound company of none but Him. You are like a finely tuned instrument. If you are surrounded by noise, the world cannot hear your true melody. God hushes the world so you can finally hear the note you were meant to play. Think of the heart as a vessel. If it is filled with the opinions, dramas, and energies of people who do not seek the divine, there is no room for the divine to enter. The emptying of your life is the preparation for a new filling. I invite you now to stop fighting the silence. For the next 7 days, do not try to fill the gaps. If the phone doesn't ring, let it stay silent. If you feel the urge to reach out to someone who has clearly walked away, pause. Take a breath. Instead, take 5 minutes each night to sit in that loneliness and speak to the one who never leaves. Tell him you accept the clearing. Tell him you trust the good that he knows and you do not. You will find that after a week of not resisting the isolation itself begins to feel like a warm embrace. You are not alone. You are being prepared for a version of yourself that could never exist in a crowd. You are being upgraded. There is a peace that comes when you realize that every no from the world is a yes from the divine. As you close your eyes tonight, feel the weight of the world lifting. The people who are gone were only ever shadows. The light that cast them is still here. Return to your Fitra. Return to the quiet strength of your own soul. The silence is not an end. It is the beginning of a conversation that will last for eternity. Sleep now, knowing that the one who removed the world from your heart did so only to make room for himself. You are safe. You are seen. And you are exactly where you need to be.